This podcast is sponsored by Camera Museum of London at 44 Museum Street. Welcome to a Fish Out of Water podcast. This is your host, Richard Lipman. Today, we are interviewing Katharine Birbalsingh.
This is Michaela Community School. Welcome to the school. I hope you will enjoy your visit. You're about to go on your tour. We've just gone to get the tour guides.
A tour of the school proceeded by two young pupils, one male, one female. I visited every classroom, stood at the back and listened. Apart from the sixth form class, I was outstanding. I went out to the break, I spoke to everyone, I was escorted around. Then I had lunch with the kids. Went back to reception, was taken up to Katharine's office, and the rest is history. Or should I rather say, a glimpse of the future. Katharine, sorry, I'm a bit too loud. Katharine Birbalsingh.
Birbalsingh.
Thank you very much. I hear a slight accent.
Yes.
Can you tell me more?
I grew up in Canada, so I've been here for 30 years, but I was there till my teens.
How was Canada?
Yeah, it was good. It was, I was a kid, so I know where the bowling alleys are and things.
Did you grow up in the West or in the East?
In Toronto.
In Toronto. And your parents, how did they arrive there?
Well, they're from the Caribbean. They came here first, and then my father, I suppose, went there for a better life and took my mother with him.
Were you influenced at all by the education system there?
Not really, although the schools were chaotic and not the way I would run a school. So in that sense, yes, and same with my school here that I went to. But I don't think I thought that at the time. It wasn't until much later that I thought I would look back now and think that.
What about socially? How was that? Were you a happy kid?
Oh, well, I was one of those kids who was very hardworking and quite quiet, and then would get ignored or bullied as a result. So I wouldn't say very happy. I wouldn't, I was just I wasn't unhappy. I just was a bit of a loner.
How were you bullied?
Well, they might threaten you. You'd have to hide away from certain individuals because you might get beaten up, that sort of thing.
So would you say you were brought up in a rough neighborhood, or sort of at the time?
Well, not necessarily, but I think in lots of schools that's pretty normal, actually, the threat of being beaten up.
Yeah.
And that's just normal. I think people sort of think, oh, well, in all schools you'll have bullying and you'll have kids being beaten up, and that's normal, but it doesn't need to be normal. And I don't think kids should have to put up with that kind of thing. I mean, and I don't think it's good for them, know. I think some people think, yeah, school of hard knocks and so on, it's good. But I really don't think it is. I think children should be allowed their childhood.
And you read a lot? Did you write earlier on? Did you start to write?
Well, who I am is because of my career in teaching.
Right.
So at school, it wasn't that I was outraged and thought, one day I'm going to set up my own school. It wasn't until I became a teacher that I then started to observe what was going on and thought, oh my goodness.
We're going to move into that journey. So after you were in Canada, you brought up mixed race. At university in Oxford, and you got to Oxford, right? How did you feel once you got to Oxford?
Well, there I was completely out of place. So that was in the early 90s, and there weren't very many black students at Oxford. And not only that, but there weren't very many students who were state educated. And if they were state educated, they were from particular types of state schools that were, filled with very privileged kids and so on. So, yeah, I was completely out of place there. And as a result, perhaps did not enjoy it as much as I should have.
What about the teaching? Do you think it was good?
Well, that's what's interesting actually about Oxford and Cambridge, is that they assume, or at least they did, I don't know if they still do, they assume that you've already been taught everything. And so you go there and you might have a tutorial, which is a one-on-one chat about your essay with one of the dons, and you can go along to lectures, but there is no real teaching at all that goes on. You know, like a lecture is the lecturer just reading through his notes and telling you about Descartes or whatever it is. I did philosophy and French. But then you have these weekly tutorials where you go along with your essay, and that's a conversation with someone about your ideas. It's not teaching. The assumption was then, I don't know if it still is, that they didn't need to teach you because you'd already been taught really well at school. I think that's a misunderstanding now from Oxford and Cambridge. I think perhaps they've learned their lessons over the years, and perhaps now their first year undergraduates have a different experience to the one that I had in the early 90s.
There's a lot of one-to-one, right? And were you also sleeping in the campus area?
What, you mean outside?
Inside.
Right.
Inside the college. You see,
I thought you meant like with the
all connects
protests.
to here, because your time in Oxford and Cambridge maybe is connected with the sort of community spirit that you feel here, right? When you're in Oxford and Cambridge, I noticed, for example, moats around colleges, and you can live in the college, right? It's almost like a boarding school, right?
Yes.
In a sense. Did you feel that when you were there on the first year?
No, definitely. You live in your college, you have a library there and a bar and grounds to kind of sit out and have picnics on. And that's what we did. And you'd meet people from other colleges, but you tended to hang around with the people from your college. And it is a very unique experience, which only very few privileged people are able to experience who go to Oxford, Cambridge.
Were you invited to other students' abodes or life? Did you see anything beyond? What was your impression?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you just have student rooms that you go and visit, and you go and visit other college bars and events that are taking place in other colleges. I mean, this is a very long time ago, of course. But it was...
Is there any experience that you remember that may have changed your outlook on things?
Well, yes. So it was there I decided to become a teacher. I used to go and visit inner city schools in London, Birmingham, Manchester, and so on, to talk to kids from the inner city about Oxford and Cambridge.
Why?
Well, the idea was to take black students from Oxford and send them into the inner city so that they could talk and say, look, I'm there and I'm doing well, so you can come too, kind of thing. And I would watch the children change their minds in front of me. So at first you'd come along to talk to them and they would sort of say, oh, a bunch of snobs, don't want to go. And by the end, they'd be saying, oh, well, maybe I'll apply. And so I thought, oh, this looks like fun, actually. Maybe I should go into teaching.
There's a caveat, though. You've got to get the grades.
Yes. So whenever you go into schools, you know, you would the teachers would put together the brightest students to talk to.
Right.
And then, you know, many years later, when I was talking at an event to advertise teaching, a young lady came up to me afterwards, after I'd spoken, and I told the story that I've just told you about how I got into teaching. And she said, well, you know, one of those schools you visited in London, I was there. I was a student at the school. And I said, oh. I said, well, what's happened to you? And she said, well, I applied to Oxford and I got in and I did my degree there, thanks to what I had said to her. And she said, and now I've been working in the city in a bank, but I'm not sure I really like it. And now I've decided to become a teacher, which was a lovely thing, really. That I saw that circle, you know, in terms of impact that you can have as a teacher, you know.
You're still in contact with her?
No, I mean, we just said hello to each other then, and that was that.
I understand that at uni you joined the Socialist Workers' Party and read Living Marxism.
Yes, so I was...
Do you still adhere to the core values of these publications?
No, I don't. I mean, I think even at the time I used to question some of it, but I was very much
what would you
a
question?
socialist. I remember very distinctly on the street with somebody who was one of the members of the Socialist Workers' Party, and he was talking about freedom of speech. And I was much more inclined to think that people should be able to think and say what they want. And he was saying, no, they shouldn't. So that was a way in which I disagreed. But I would have very much agreed with the welfare state doing as much as possible for people. I would not have connected the idea that by giving people everything, you undermine their sense of responsibility and their sense of duty and their sense of dignity, frankly, and that life isn't just about gaining as much money as you possibly can. I would have said at the time that equality is what matters as opposed to equality of opportunity. I wouldn't have understood. In my mind, there were the good guys, who were those on the left, and there were the bad guys, those on the right. And the people on the right just want to earn lots of money and play golf. That's what I would have said.
Was that the case at uni?
Well, so there's and it's a very good point, that there's some justification to the way in which I thought, which was that there were a number of people at university who were just obnoxious. I mean, they had been educated at very expensive schools.
Like Eton?
Eton, Harrow, Westminster, that sort of place. And they were a certain type. So they were not, I mean, there will have been some people where families were putting money aside to send their children to a private school and you know, missing out on holidays as a result. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about young men who were part of these male-only clubs, and they would drink gin out of a shoe to be initiated into these sorts of clubs, and they would behave very badly and horribly and were just quite rude and just so, they'd had life so easy. So I really didn't like that. And an alternative to thinking like that was to be a socialist. But there was little in between, or if there was, I didn't find it. Let me put
there
it
are stories that surfaced that Boris Johnson apparently was into the sort of clubs at one point over there.
Yeah, so he would have been a typical that type of
right.
of person I'm talking about. Now, that's not to say that these people don't grow up and can become much more sensible. But certainly at university, I didn't like them at all.
Did you make friends there, and do you still keep in touch with them?
Yes, I made friends. And tutors, no. Well, I mean, there's one tutor of mine who, if I was to write to him, he would write back now, but we're not kind of in touch regularly. And I made a few good friends. There's one very good friend of mine who teaches at Winchester, actually, college, so one of those types of schools. And I've known him since I was there. And then there are others who I have kept in touch with. I have another friend who lives in London. He works for the BBC. And I have another friend, she lives in Wales. She's Welsh. She's more of an academic.
Right.
Yeah.
You went straight into education. You started working. I mean, as a teacher, you know, back then, did you have to learn a lot? Did you have to learn the curriculum? Did you believe in the curriculum when you started teaching?
Well, I was a French teacher, so that's not particularly...
Français?
Yes.
Tu as vécu en français?
J'étais à Paris pendant 2 ans.
Okay.
1993 à 1994, 95. So yes, and I was a French teacher for years. I mean, these days I you know, it's been many years since I've taught, but I did French and philosophy at university, you see. So that's why I became a French teacher. And so that's not, I mean, it's sort of apolitical, isn't it? I mean,
sure.
Well, I say that. I mean, these days it's become a lot more political. So in those days, what were they trying to do? They would introduce in textbooks alternative names to Jean-Philippe and Jean. Instead, they would have Malek and other more Arab-sounding names, etc. And they'd have brown faces and black faces and show that France was a multicultural country, exactly, in the same way that Britain was. So, and I thought that was a good idea. I mean, good, that needed to happen. But I'd say nowadays things have become more extreme. And when I say more extreme, textbooks are always being accused of being racist and so on. So even within the world of French teaching, it can be political. But in English teaching and history teaching and so on, in those days things were much more traditional than they are now. The teaching of Shakespeare was pretty standard. Having said that, the exams across various subjects were basically dumbed down year on year in, throughout my career.
You feel that education has gotten worse in Britain?
Since 2020, yes. So I'd say in 2010 it started getting a lot better. Michael Gove was the education secretary, right, and he made some great decisions that changed things for the better, increasing the rigor and holding teachers and pupils to account. So he did really great stuff for education.
And before that, Labour, apparently one of the success stories was that they brought in less people per class, so smaller numbers per class. Is that true? That change anything?
I don't know. Did they bring in fewer kids? I don't think so. But even if they did, I think that the number of children in a class is a bit of a red herring. It doesn't really matter. If you have 26 kids or 30 kids, who cares? Yes, if you have 12, it makes a difference.
Right.
But the difference between 26 and 30 is neither here nor there. A little bit less marking, I suppose, for the teacher. The main thing is, do you have the discipline? Are the children listening? Are they doing their homework? Right. Have you got good explanations? Are you inspiring them, and so on? So that's what matters. Tony Blair's 1997. He spanned the early part of my career.
Yeah.
And I would say that it was all very progressive and that we did the wrong sorts of things. Michael Gove came in and changed that, made things a lot more rigorous and more traditional, which is good as far as I'm concerned. And in 2020, while the Conservatives were still in power, obviously until very recently, Michael Gove had long gone, but more importantly, George Floyd happened. And that has changed the landscape of education in a negative way, I'd say.
We'll come back to that. That's going to the political side.
Okay.
But one thing about the traditional versus the progressive, can you give us an example?
Yeah, so progressive teaching is the desks are all in groups and the children are sort of teaching each other. It's child-centered learning, so the children are leading the learning. The teacher walks around amongst the desks and helps to keep the children on task. They might have a big piece of sugar paper and some markers and they're writing stuff down and talking about it. In a traditional classroom, the desks are all in rows facing the teacher. The teacher's at the front. The teacher is telling the children knowledge and perhaps, hands up, right, you turn to your partner. It doesn't have to just be the teacher lecturing, You are teaching and you're explaining and then you're asking to see whether or not they've understood. And then you might set them off on a task which will then demonstrate whether or not they've understood it. And then you bring them back and then you ask for the answers. And then you say, oh, we've got that wrong. Let's see how many have got it right. Oh, we haven't understood. Let me reteach this and so on. That is a space where the teacher is leading the learning as opposed to the children leading the learning. Now, with the traditional side of things, the idea is that the teacher knows more than the children, so you want to spend time actually giving them knowledge. In the progressive side of things, the idea is that children will be bored by that and that actually you want to make things more relevant and more exciting for children. And if they're teaching themselves, then they're collaborating like you would do in an office space as an adult. And so they'll learn more that way. I think the mistake the progressive makes is that children are not adults. Children are children. They're not experts. So how on earth they're going to teach each other French when they don't know any French? That doesn't make any sense. So often you find in those progressive classrooms, children are not learning very much, and they're talking about who they fancy and what they're doing tonight and what video game they're buying and that kind of thing, because, well, they're kids, and so they'll waste their time.
Would you say that the school that you set up recently, we're going to go to that a bit later, is more authoritarian in practice?
Well, it depends on what you mean by that. I think people often confuse the idea of being in authority with being an authoritarian. So what I mean by that is authoritarian means there's no choice. The children have no choice. Whereas when you're an authority, you are advising them and telling them, this is what's going to happen if you do the wrong thing. This is what's going to happen if you do the right thing. It's up to you. And then children are taught how to make the right choices so that they will be successful in life. When you're an authority, you love the children, and you're doing this because you care about them. When you're an authoritarian, well, you're like some of those caricatures like Trunchbull from Matilda, or any of those silly movies where you see in the 19th century, some horrible teacher or some horrible parents, or normally the orphanage is run by some horrible woman who hates children and is just there because she has to be. Teachers don't have to be teachers. They could do something else. They're doing it because they love children. Now, that's partly the problem, because they love children and they're told if you love children, then you must just allow them to do what they want. Then teachers fail children. But what you need to do is love them enough to overcome your own ickiness around discipline and actually help those children instill self-discipline in themselves so that they can succeed both now and later on in life.
I did a tour of your school, and I noticed that inside the classrooms, there's a lot of interaction, there's a lot of raising hands. There's a lot of communication between children.
Yes, exactly.
Is this unique, or have you seen this? Are you inspired by J.K. Rowling or by practices in Japan or far out lands out there?
Well, I think that's just pair work. When you see them talking to each other, it's just pair work. The reason why it stands out, and that's pretty standard in classrooms. Having said that, the reason why it stands out to you is because of the speed at which we do it. So because we are controlling every minute of the classroom and we want to get through a lot of content, we increase the pace. So you're seeing them turn very quickly to each other and then turn back to the teacher. And we're doing that as well because if you give them too long, they start talking about other things. You want them to just talk about the thing that you want and then boom, back to the teacher. So that's what you see there. The hands going up, well, that's pretty standard in the classroom. It's just what will strike you as different here is that the vast majority of them are putting their hands up. And that seems odd because that doesn't happen in other classrooms. But if you're getting the teaching right, the vast majority should be putting their hands up. Because if they're all listening and the teacher's explaining properly, then why wouldn't they all know the answer?
The discipline is incredible. No one's talking to each other. Everyone's attentive.
Yes.
I noticed that.
Exactly. So if everyone's attentive and if you're doing a good explanation and you're a good teacher, well, everyone's going to know the answer. So everyone should be putting their hands up. Now, there might be the occasional person in the room who hasn't really listened properly, but generally speaking, our kids are all going to put their hands up because they know.
Where did you get that idea from?
What? Which idea?
Do you think that... it seems to me that you've designed the class and you've designed, what should happen at lunchtime? What should...
Well, we have. We have designed it, but you're seeing a finished product. Yes. We've been here for 10 years. So we have made small changes here and there. Said, you know what? I think we could go faster. Let's go a bit faster. Oh, you know what? I think we can do... Turn to your partner, for instance, where they're doing the pair work. We didn't have that at all when we first started for years. And then a guest came and suggested it, and I thought, oh, well, let's try it. We tried it in one classroom. It seemed to work quite well. And then we did it more and more, and then we got faster and faster and so on. So you're seeing a finished product.
I see, so it's a progression.
Yes.
Do you see this kind of school here as being the model for schools across the country?
Yeah, I do think you could take lots. I mean, obviously, each head teacher needs to run his school as he wants, but I do think you could take an enormous amount from here and instill that in other schools, and it would transform the schools for the better.
What about private schools and faith schools? Do you believe in those?
I'm not against them. And I think they should all take the ideas too. I mean, they are schools after all.
How does Ofsted feel about it?
Well, we've had 2 very good Ofsteds. We've got, the top score, and they didn't have much to say to improve it. So, those particular inspectors were impressed. Having said that, to some extent, Ofsted is a bit of a whimsical game. You could get a set of inspectors who don't like us, and then they would not rate us so highly.
So has that happened before?
No, we've only had 2 Ofsteds. They've all been excellent. But I do know that there are people who come here who are very experienced teachers, or there was an ex-Ofsted inspector who used to come here. Now, I have to say, over years he came here because he was coupled with the DFE, and they would send out ex-Ofsted inspectors to look at the free schools in order to say, come on, do this, do that, you change these things and you'll get the top score. That was the idea. And when he first came here, he hated it. He absolutely hated it. And I kept arguing with him. And he came, I'd say, maybe 4 or 5 times to the school over a period of about 1.5 to 2 years. And in that time, he changed his mind. And he would say to you, yeah, I was wrong. It's an amazing school. I just instinctively didn't like what I was seeing. But then I came to change my mind over time.
What about the students and the parents? Do you ever have any conflict with them, for example? I mean, things like no mobile phones, no praying, right? There's no prayers.
All the time. All the time we have conflicts. I mean, we're an inner city school. So the reason why there's so downstairs when you came in, reception, there's a glass, on top of the desk. There didn't used to be glass there. It used to be open. But then parents would leap over the counter and say, give me back my phone. And then if we weren't giving back the phone, they would steal the phones of the office staff and say, I'm taking this phone then, and I'd be phoning the police, and it was crazy. So we put up the glass, and all of that has stopped. But yes, parents can be a bit mad.
Have there been moments where the kids have had to leave because the parents were not happy with the way they were being taught?
The parents are never not happy with the way they're being taught. There have been a couple of times, for instance, where a parent has said, I want my phone, and they've said, well, I'm taking my child out so I can get my phone back, for instance. That, in the last 10 years, I'd say that's happened a couple of times. And there are some, very few, but there have been parents who have said, you know what, this just isn't the right school for us. We'd rather something that wasn't as demanding. They don't necessarily like the amount of homework, for instance. That can be an issue.
It's about an hour a day, right?
Well, that's for the little ones.
Oh, it's more for the big ones.
Oh, yeah, no, there is more.
How much more?
A couple of hours.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking 11, 12.
So then by the time they get to be 13, 14, then they're a bit older, 14, 15, I suppose.
And what if they fail to do their homework?
Then they get a detention.
And what happens if they still misbehave?
Well, there are 4 or 5 detention slots at the end of the day, so they can get a number of detentions. If they have more than 5 detentions, then they would go to what we call the referral centre, where they have to work in silence the following day.
Right.
And that's enough of a incentive not to go. They don't want to go there, so they...
I was by the reception and I heard, I think there was possibly a kid who had misbehaved and he was being screamed at. Does that work? Does that technique work?
Yeah, I mean, I presume you'll have noticed it was short.
Very short.
Yeah.
Yeah, about 2 minutes.
What's that?
About 2-3 minutes.
Right.
Well, up to 5.
I'd say that's longer than usual. We tend to do very short kind of and then, because that just makes them go whoop, and then and then you talk to them about how disappointed you are and so on. It's a technique, and which I'd say works well with kids.
Oh, okay. And the teachers, the parents, are they aware of that?
Yep, before they sign up, I say to them, we will shout.
When they sign up, do they have to sign a contract or an agreement?
Yes, they do. And, of course, parents sign contracts and then don't abide by the contract, but they do have to sign a contract. But I should say, the shouting that you heard
yes,
will have been, that might happen once a day. Like it's not something that's happening constantly. When kids arrive in the first few weeks in year 7, there's much more shouting then to get them into line. But then once they're in line, then you don't have to do anything because they're well trained and they know what they need to do.
Would you agree? I'm not trying to be provocative here, but what about the idea of caning? So one of my relatives was caned at school. I don't think he changed. Do you agree with that, or?
Well, you have no idea what he would have been like had he not been caned. I mean, you don't. You never have a counterfactual. But I don't believe caning is necessary. Okay. All you need is a strict environment that where children can choose, and then they can get the detention or not. It's up to them.
Miss Snuffy, you wrote a book about being single.
Yes, I did.
Was that fiction or was it part reality?
Well, I suppose it was when I was much younger, and I would go on dates, and a friend of mine said, "Oh, your stories are so funny, you should write a book about them." And I thought, okay, fine, I will. So, but I mean, so some of the stories would be real, but there were fictional characters in the story.
And how long did it take you to write that?
Oh, I don't know, some years.
Oh, okay. So, Ms. Snuffy, moving on, you wrote that in an internet cafe, according to what I've read. And
you mean my blog?
Blog,
yes.
Which turned into a book, To Miss With Love,
yes.
if I'm correct.
Yes.
I read the first chapter, and I was thinking it could be turned into a series. Is that something you would agree
I see. With? Yeah, I suppose it could be. Yeah, I suppose.
Is everything in that in that book true?
Yeah. So what that book was all of the stories had been on the blog that I was writing, and they were real stories about real kids and things that had happened. But the lawyers said you couldn't have one child. So the names were things like Dopey and Furious and Stoic and so on. I'd made up names.
Yeah.
But you couldn't have Dopey reading the story about him and recognizing that it was him. That kid would say, "Oh, that's me," because I can tell all those things happened to me. So I had to take the stories that were all real and have them mixed up and apply to different characters, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So while everything in it is real, the stories all apply. They were mixed up and made to fit different characters. So no one child would be able to say, "That's me."
I see. And the blog is no longer up there. Is that correct?
But the blog came down. Yeah.
Probably publisher's request, right?
Well, at the time, it wasn't even the publishers. It was because I had given that speech at the Conservative Party conference in 2010, and then I'd gotten to all kinds of hot water, and I was basically had to leave my school, and so in order to calm things down, because it really was, I was all over the press and so on, the blog came down.
Can I ask, could you summarize what you said?
In the speech? Well, I essentially said what was unacceptable at the time and would probably be unacceptable now, although less so, I think, that while the left had done good things for education in the past, we'd gone too far down the progressive route, and that we should pull back more towards the right. That while white liberals want to help black children in the inner city, actually their progressive methods are hurting those children. I gave some examples of kids who I knew to say, look, if we keep making excuses for children all the time, they become incapable of learning anything. They don't make an effort. They don't do their homework. They don't show up on time, and so on. And I said that the system was broken. I didn't say teachers were bad. I was saying the system was broken, and that we needed to fix the system so that we could have higher standards for children. Now, I very stupidly thought that people just didn't know that this was the case, that, education had its problems. If I just went along, because Michael Gove had asked me to go along and speak at the conference, so I thought, you know what, I'll go and I'll tell everybody what the problems are, and then they'll go away and fix them. I mean, that's obviously is completely stupid, but I was just a bit naive and thought that that's what would happen.
Did he say anything to you, Michael, after the speech?
No, everyone just clapped. I think he will have thought, like everybody, we were clapping and that's the end of it. But I say everybody clapped. The audience stood. So because they gave me a standing ovation, the media then turned to me. And at that point, my life had just been the life of a deputy head. I was just, I was a normal teacher.
Yeah.
And my life changed at that point.
For the better?
No, for the much worse, because I lost my job. And then I was told I'd never work in the state sector again. And I was just trying to survive for years when trying to set up the school on bits of writing that I would do for the Telegraph and so on. So no, it was really bad. And you look back now and you say, oh, well, there you go, this extraordinary thing happened, and then, look at what you've managed to do. Yeah, but it was by no means a foregone conclusion that we were going to create this school, because we were stopped at every turn. It took us 3.5 years. We could easily have failed at opening the school. I mean, I was a dog like a bone with it, mainly because I didn't have any choice, because if I didn't open up the school, then what would I do with my life, right?
Were you working with other people to set up this school?
Yes, so I gathered together a group of people who then helped me, set it up.
And why? Why did you want to set up a school?
Because there was no other way of getting back into teaching. Because I'd spoken at the Conservative Party conference, and you really can't do that as a teacher. So there was just no way I'd ever get interviews. I couldn't do anything with my life. Now, I could probably have gone to teach in the private sector, but I didn't want to do that.
Why?
Well, because I've spent my whole life, I don't just teach in the state sector, I teach in the inner city. It's what I know, it's what I love.
Can you relate to kids more from the inner city?
It's more that I want to feel like I'm having impact on the world for the better. And while I don't have anything against the private sector, it's not really for me. It'd be like going to work in the city.
Right.
That is not for me. I want to do something where I feel like I'm having impact in a social way that makes the world a better place.
Do you think the education system maintains social order, economic order, class?
Yes, I do think it does, but not for the reasons that most people would say that. Most people would just say, well, the private sector, it's not fair. They've got tennis courts and swimming pools, and therefore life is better for them. And I would say that's irrelevant. Who cares about tennis courts? What matters is, are we being taught maths and English and how to be polite and how to be resilient and hardworking and so on. And I'd say that too often we don't expect that of kids. And because we're not expecting it of kids, that class divide remains and gets worse as a result for some of those kids. I mean, obviously not all state schools is that the case, but for some kids in state schools where they come from more challenging backgrounds, they tend to fail.
And I'm wondering, have you learned anything from other countries? Like
Yeah,
Japan,
loads. Well, I mean, I say loads. I've been to many other countries and seen what, their classrooms. And it was something that I did maybe in 2003, 2004. I went, in those early years there, I would go on holidays to various places. I'd see their schools, and I'd think these children are a lot poorer than the children in Britain. So how come they're sitting quietly and listening to the teacher in a room full of 250 other children?
Where's that?
Oh, in South Africa, I spent a whole summer working there in a school. I visited schools in Jamaica, in India, in China, other parts of the Caribbean. I would go to these places and just think, I don't understand it. I don't understand why can they behave if they're poor and poorer. Because we were constantly told in Britain, as we still are told, if children are poor, therefore they can't behave. I just think that's wrong.
I noticed the plaque here from Michaela.
Mm-hmm. She was an old colleague of mine.
Okay.
Who was just old-fashioned. She came from St. Lucia, the Caribbean, and just thought children should behave themselves and believed in rigor and obedience. And so we named the school after her. She sadly died of cancer. It made sense because she's just old school in the way that we are.
I also noticed a quote from Truman.
Yes.
Which goes by...
we've got so many quotes from different people all over the place. I don't know.
This one was a particular one. Is about if you can let others take the credit, you can achieve a lot.
Oh, I see. Yes.
How much of that is true in the way you work here?
Yeah, very much. Very true. We're very much a team, and we don't really care.
How do you pick your staff?
Well, they pick us to some extent. So because we're so well known, you need to be a certain type of person to apply here in the first place.
Right.
And then we do a lot to try and support you to come on board with the ethos of the school and the teaching methods and so on. You know, you went around and saw classes. It's possible that you will have seen a class with a teacher who's only been here a couple of weeks, you know.
Right.
But very quickly we try and teach them how to teach in a Michaela way.
They were very enthusiastic. They were engaging the students.
Yes.
And also what struck me was, you know, during lunch, you know, they would talk about, you know, sensible topics and be very polite. And then there was this sort of achievement. I mean, not achievement. Appreciation. Tell us about that.
Well, that's where they demonstrate gratitude. You know, you're a happier person if you're grateful. It doesn't matter how little you have. So they get up and say, I'd like to thank Mr. Smith for creating some booklets for us to learn from, or I'd like to thank my mum for waking me up this morning, and so on.
Is that throughout all of the years?
Yep, all of them every day we're doing those appreciations.
Does that help you psychologically?
Yeah, I think so. If you read self-help books, they'll always tell you to write down 5 things at the end of the day of what you're grateful for. In fact, I'd say that all of our values you find in self-help books. You know, if everyone was to go attend a school like Michaela, you wouldn't have a midlife crisis at 45. You wouldn't, because you'd have those values already instilled in you.
I also noticed that everyone was there's no phones, right? There's no phones,
Yes.
and everyone's holding this zipper with all their stuff in.
Their work packs,
Work packs, their names on it.
Yes, exactly.
Is there a little bit of socialism mixed with some Japanese ethos and?
Well, that's just practical. It's easy.
Right.
You know, the thing is, they have to go around
uniforms as well.
What's that?
And uniforms.
Yeah, the uniform. So, look, the uniform is about belonging. We're all part of the school. When the England team go out to play football, they don't all wear different shirts, right? So we're all looking the same. The work pack is more when we thought, right, they're going to wander around. How do they carry the stuff around? If they carry their bags, they beat each other over the heads with their bags and so on. So we didn't want that. And then we thought, well, they can carry their books. But if they're carrying papers, they'll drop out. There'll be a mess. So then we thought, well, let's get them a little pack to put their stuff in. So that's all that is. It's just a work pack that they can put all their stuff in. It's just practical. It just makes it easier.
A friend of mine is a teacher. He's got a few questions for you.
Okay.
And we're going to get into some excellent questions, I think, hopefully. He goes at many, you know, many teachers, managers are decolonizing the curriculum, and this is being pushed by unions or the left.
Yes.
Have you seen evidence of this? And what do you think about that? He calls it woke education. What's your thoughts on all of that?
Well, I agree with him. I mean, look, it's not like we don't teach any black authors, but it's gone too far. It's exactly what I said in 2010. It's all going too far. They want to ban all dead white men. Well, we do a lot of teaching of dead white men because dead white men are the canon, and they are the ones. Shakespeare has been influencing literature for 400 years. To not teach Shakespeare would be insane. But that doesn't mean that you can't, at A-level, read some Toni Morrison, you know? You know, when you look at poetry, you can include a couple of black poets. But because we see everything through the lens of identity now, as opposed to this is a poem or a piece of writing that is representative of our country and our history, that has been handed down and is culturally relevant to us. Obviously, you wouldn't be reading Milton in China, right? You know, it depends on where you are. And the fact that we are so uncomfortable with dead white men is political.
What's that?
That's our changes. So they're going to change lessons.
It's 1:55, change lessons. Okay, well, you know what? I thought I was in the middle of the set of Full Metal Jacket at one point.
Well, you know, normally you have a bell. That's just, we have pips, that's all. And it's all very precise. You can hear them. Did you hear the movement of the chairs?
Yes.
Now the thing is, because we have silent corridors and everything's so strict.
In line.
What you don't hear is, right now, normally in a school, when they're changing lessons, you would hear rah, and loads of noise and kids running and doors slamming. But here, you hear the pitter-patter of the feet, but that's all you hear.
Yeah, that's incredible. You have Russell
Crowe, yes, from Gladiator.
How so?
Well,
has he visited?
No, but at my birthday, my staff gave me him as a present because I'm always showing them this video of Russell Crowe where he says, "Hold the line, stay with me," when he's talking to his soldiers and they're about to go to battle. And so I'm always saying that to the staff.
Do you feel school is a bit of a battle? Like you're really teaching people to become to be able to face the world, and
Yes.
become successful in this very
Yes.
dog eat dog society.
Exactly. Well, in fact, we always say to the teachers, if it doesn't feel like a fight in your classroom, then you're doing something wrong. You need to be fighting to get them to be better than what they would otherwise be. It's like when you go to the gym and you're on the treadmill. And if you're not pushing yourself to failure, then you're not making a difference. You lift that weight, you have the last few reps need to be so, you're in pain. That's what needs to happen. So, I mean, that's just how you get to be successful at anything.
Are you teaching people to become more competitive?
There's a little bit of competition.
Collaborative.
They do help each other. I always think it's like a relationship between two brothers, for instance. They're a bit competitive, but they also help each other and they love each other because they're brothers.
What if they hate each other?
Well, then that's a problem, but I don't think our children hate each other.
Do you select the people that come here?
No, they're given to us by the local council.
I see.
Yeah, we're just a normal state school.
So anyone can apply?
Anyone can come here.
What's the ratio of getting in, though?
Well, there's a complicated system of admissions, which means that you can actually put us first but not get in, but put us sixth and get in. It's all a bit complicated, and I don't really understand the
If you could change the education system, what would you do? Let's say you have ultimate authority.
Yeah, it's a good question, because it's culture that needs to change. Because I think Gove made a number of good changes, which unfortunately will now probably be lost given the new government that's come in, although I don't know. But the things that they are saying are all the wrong things, sadly. But he did make the right sorts of changes in Whitehall. The problem is that you then need to change the culture of expectations of children and what teachers are actually doing, He can give the freedoms to schools to do what they want, but if the schools choose to not really take detention seriously, then what do you do?
How do you enforce that?
Well, I don't think you can. I think you need to win hearts and minds. And that's what I've tried to do here. We have 800 visitors a year here. You've come at a time when we don't really have many visitors because the new staff are just embedding. So that's why you didn't see other staff. But other visitors.
Yeah.
Normally you'd have 10 visitors in a day,
No, I'm happy that I was allowed.
Yes. But I'm just saying that's why you didn't see them.
I see.
After half term, you'll see 10 visitors, 5 to 10 visitors a day.
Interesting. That's not normal in other schools.
No, it's not. No. People come from all over the world because, well, it's an amazing sight to see, isn't it?
It looks like an experiment. And, this comes to not my last question. It comes to another question. If there were to be a colony on a different planet, and let's say not everyone likes Elon Musk, some people do, but we know he's got the vision to create colonies outside of Earth. And your school was chosen.
Yes.
How would you feel about that?
Well, I think our school should be everywhere, so it should be on Mars as well. Although I have to say, I don't think Elon Musk would want our school on Mars. Elon Musk is very much a progressive when it comes to education. And that's what's so interesting, because he's obviously, a man on the right. And yet there are many people on the right who, when it comes to education, revert to a progressive stance. And that's because it's just so seductive. The idea of children leading their own learning and so on. Children are able to collaborate together. They just don't understand what a child is.
What do you think of that school in Baker Street? It's quite well known. It's unusual. They focus on children's abilities and strengths.
In Baker Street?
Near Baker Street. No, it's not some sort of spiritual school.
Oh, I
can't remember. But do you believe in schools that only teach a certain type of thing, like engineering or
No.
sports?
Look, this is a secondary school, so obviously you're going to teach a variety of different subjects.
Right.
And then after secondary school, you can specialize in engineering, or you want to go and do a sports B.Tech or whatever, then that makes sense. But I think up until the age of 16, we need to teach children the basics. You want everybody leaving school being able to read and write and be numerate and so on.
But again, if you had your say over how schools should be run, what would it be?
Well, like I say, I believe in the freedom for schools to be able to choose. You can't force schools to implement good discipline. You would have to persuade them. So I once gave Michael Gove the advice of putting a bunch of teachers who sort of get it into a van and going around to different schools and trying to explain to them, look, here's what's possible, etc.
But there's about 10,000 schools in this country, right?
I know, well, that's the thing. It's a tough one. It's a very tough
but don't you think
question.
part of it is also the parents? Maybe they just don't care about the kids.
No, I don't think it's the case that they don't care. I just don't think they realize how important school is, and they don't actually know what's going on inside the schools. They don't know what's happening in the classrooms.
Well, for one thing, you've banned mobile phones. I don't think there's any school in this country that's banned it.
Well, they have in theory, right? So they would tell you that they've banned it, but that isn't actually what happens. You know, the thing is that...
What do you do with people's phones? Do they put them in a locker or something? Or
no, if we hear it or we see it, we take it. So if they have it on them and we never hear it, well, that's fine. It's just that if we were to hear it or see it, we would take it, and they know that. So that means we never see mobile phones, ever, like ever.
And you were saying previously to the question. So moving around the country.
Yeah, I mean, look, people need to be convinced of what is possible, and it's very hard to do. I don't know how we move the country from where it's at now. You know, it requires all of us changing our minds, not just teachers, the public. All of us need to value the things that we used to value in 1985. We've lost our understanding of the old traditional ways.
How true is 1984, George Orwell's 19? A lot of it is about education and how things could change.
Yes.
And shred. And
yes.
Minimize.
Yes.
And condense. Do you believe that could ever happen?
Well, I don't know. Now it's the problem is that it's all about being a victim and excuse making, and no one taking responsibility, and everyone just expecting somebody else to pick up the slack for them.
This is related to the BLM movement as well as other movements.
Yes.
George Floyd, slavery, injustice, inequality, victimhood, white privilege.
All of that. Yes, exactly. All of that.
Do you believe in that?
Well, I think that is what's constantly pushed nowadays in the public and also in our schools, and I don't think that's helpful to children. I think it encourages them not to make any effort, and they then fail, and then they say it's because I'm black, it's because I'm poor, it's because my dad wasn't around, etc., etc. As opposed to, I've got the cards that I've got, and I'm going to deal them, and I'm going to make the most of my life.
That's interesting. AI in education. Do you think, is that something that you would work with?
To a limited degree, but not really. I want children with pens and paper doing their work.
I did notice that.
You know, that's what they do.
Pens
here.
and papers.
Yeah.
Are you influenced a little bit by some of J.K. Rowling and some of us school methods, or what
I don't even know what she says about school, actually. So I couldn't say.
Well, okay. A lot of it is based on discipline.
You mean in Harry Potter?
In Harry Potter.
Oh, I see. I thought you meant her personally. Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know. No. I mean, we just look at what works in schools, and schools like ours, you know, with our kind of intake.
A few other quick questions.
Okay. We'll take a few minutes and then we should wrap up, because otherwise I'll...
We've talked about reform. Lifelong learning. Is that something that you...
Well, of course you learn all your life, don't you? But there are certain basics that you need from school to then be able to have a life of learning. Otherwise, if you don't know how to read, how are you going to spend your life learning?
And how... Just going to go back here. What do you think about culture, TV, social media as a mirror of society, and as being a role model? Do you actually believe in all that? Is it really impregnating people's minds?
Yes.
Are they losing attention?
Yes. Social media is just a poison, really. I mean, look, I understand there are some advantages, and I myself use it to spread the word about Michaela. So I suppose it's not all bad, but if you weigh it up, I think it does more bad. It's more bad than good.
If there were a documentary made about your methods, what would you like to see?
Well, there is one called Britain's Strictest Headmistress. So you can find that on the producer's website. It was on ITV a couple of years ago.
Were you happy with that?
Yeah, I mean, they just showed what we do, really, right. And they showed that it's more than just telling kids off and giving them demerits and detentions. It's about so much more than that.
What's achievement for you?
Achievement? That's a good question. It isn't just about GCSE and A-level results. It's about who you are as a person. And I want our children to be good people, be kind and grateful. Yes. All right. Okay.
Time's up a second.
Yes.
And what is failure?
Failure is, I think too many people just sort of exist. They don't really live. And that's because they haven't found meaning in their lives. And that's what I mean. They end up having to read self-help books and having a midlife crisis. So these people can be perfectly rich. And I think this is what the left gets so badly wrong. The meaning of life and dignity, they don't come from money. They come from an understanding of what makes life worthwhile. And that requires self-sacrifice, a sense of duty to other people and to one's country. It requires a selflessness. It requires a contribution to society. And we'll come back to those Oxford boys, they didn't understand any of that. That was very much about having fun and drinking gin from a shoe and being rude and so on. You want to contribute so that you can look back at your life when you're 85 and say, look, I did something. And that's what I hope for all of our children, really.
And you never had kids, is that correct? Is that something maybe you regret or not? Or?
Well, one is so busy with school. There's so much. I work all the time.
You workaholic? How does that affect your personal life?
Oh, well, I tend to work a lot because school needs me to work a lot. And also, I do podcasts, and so I should. I need to finish up now.
What about the system in Finland? Do you know about the education system?
Yes,
what do you think of
Finland is all wrong, and I've been saying for years it's all wrong. And 5, 10 years, 15 years ago, people would say Finland, and I'd say just give it time, you'll see. And you now see it beginning to plummet in the PISA tables, as I predicted it would.
Where do you see the future of Michaela and your
we're
system?
just going to try and survive the next few years.
You thinking of expanding?
We have tried, but we've been blocked in everything we've tried to do.
Who blocks you? What blocks you?
The civil servants.
Really?
Yeah. It's unfortunate.
What about going private?
Well, I could do that, but remember, I don't want to do private.
You want to help the poor, basically.
Yeah.
Are you a bit like Charles Dickens in his stories? Like, you want to help the poor, you see it from their point of view, you want them to increase social mobility.
Yeah, exactly. All
right. Last words, philosophies.
Well, like I say, you want to... Dignity and purpose is what we want in life, not money. And if we could all understand that and understand that education is in part the route towards that, then we would value our schools more, but we don't. So, because we think things like, oh, who cares how you do in your GCSEs? You can get rich without your GCSEs. Getting rich isn't going to make you have a life of meaning, and that's what matters.
Thank you very much.
All right. All right. Thank you for having me.
This podcast is sponsored by Camera Museum of London at 44 Museum Street. Thank you for listening to a Fish Out of Water podcast. This is your host, Richard Lipman. Should you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please get in touch.